I truly thought 2017 was going to be the end of Marvin Lewis's time in Cincinnati. 15 years, you feel like you've seen all that you need to see. 15 years, it feels like it was time to move on. So, of course, Mike Brown, in his ever-loving loyalty to Marvin Lewis, said, nah, dog, you got a couple of more years here. Beats me. But we probably shouldn't be that surprised either. As this is what the Bengals do. This represents the bungleship of Mike Brown's ownership of the team. It really does. And when you look back at last year's draft, you felt like, at least I did, you were seeing a team, a coaching staff, a front office that was desperate to move the needle after 5 straight seasons of making the playoffs, getting bounced in round 1. They don't make the playoffs in 2016. 2017's draft was very much about, we don't give a crap about this or that. We're going for athleticism, and we're willing to take big risks with the hope that if it pans out, that's going to really help move the needle. You take John Ross at pick 9. You take Joe Mixon in round 2. You take Jordan Willis in round 3. You take Carl Lawson in round 4. All these guys represented in different ways for different reasons, quite a bit of risk. John Ross, great 40 time, electric, elite speed, can't even make it through the 40 at the combine without getting hurt. All these injury history that he has, all these knee injuries he has, are you surprised that he suited up for, one game in 2017? Joe Mixon, well documented the issues there. Seemed like he behaved relatively well his rookie year. He was okay at times, but he wasn't great, but I don't think that was totally on him either. And Jordan Willis, I don't know that he showed that much. Carl Lawson most certainly did, so he was the revelation, but he was frankly the best pick of the 4 in terms of the gambles, and he was the guy that you took in round 4. So I was curious as to what the Bengals were going to do to improve their team here and what their draft philosophy was going to be. Were they going to be in another situation where they felt comfortable taking big risks and swinging for the fences and going for that massive gamble? Or were they going to go with a more balanced approach, or were they going to play it really safe? And I feel like the returns indicate a little bit of risk, but also a little bit of safety here in terms of what the Bengals did. Now, in terms of when you talk about the Bengals draft, you have to start off with the fact that they originally started with pick 12, but they moved down 9 slots from 12 to 21 with the Buffalo Bills, and in the process got Cordy Glenn. Now, Cordy Glenn, when healthy, is a legit NFL left tackle. He's not a superstar, but he is more than serviceable. He is reliable on the left side. You have some of those injury concerns, but for the Bengals, with as bad as their offensive line was in 2017, as much of a gaping void as it's been, and the fact that Obehe and Fisher just flat out haven't panned out, you didn't have a replacement on the roster. You find out for Whitworth, who ended up going to Los Angeles with the Rams. You had to address that position. And in a draft where the tackle position was wanting, to say the least, to be able to trade down 9 slots and get a guy like Cordy Glenn, even at a big cap number, seems like a great move for the Bengals. So that's step 1 to this. Step 2 to this was then at pick 21, choosing to address the offensive line again. And while I could sit there and say, well, I had higher grades on Isaiah Wynn and Will Hernandez, and I did, I also liked Billy Price a lot. And frankly, liked him a bit more than the guy Ragnow who went to the Lions at pick 20. Like in my final mock draft, I had Ragnow going 21 to the Bengals. I didn't know that Billy Price would go in round 1. I shouldn't have been that surprised that he went round 1. I think the bigger surprise was that Detroit jumped the Bengals to take Ragnow, and I will really always wonder, was Ragnow graded ahead of Price? Did they have similar grades where either one is there, you're going to take one, or if both are there, you got to figure out which one you're going to take? But while I technically had grades that were a little bit higher on Wynn and Hernandez, taking Billy Price here feels like a really solid choice for this team in addressing the center position, or even if you decide to play him at guard, whatever. And taking him in the 20s in the draft, you know, you could talk about reaches or this or that, but he wasn't really that big of a reach at all. And he has the chance to pan out and play a long time in this league, which oftentimes guys that are drafted in the 20s, you're unsure of whether or not they're truly going to make it. But I'm pretty confident Billy Price can. So even coming off the torn pec, this is a guy that played 4 years straight, didn't miss a game, so it doesn't feel like there's a ton of injury risk there. It really doesn't. Just a torn pec while lifting at the combine seems like one of those fluke things that just unfortunately happens from time to time. It feels like a solid, somewhat safe first-round pick that was incredibly sensible. So you're talking about with the Bengals in round 1, they turned the 12th pick into Cordy Glenn in pick 21, and then turn pick 21 into Billy Price. I don't know about any of you, but that sounds like pretty good work and manipulation of the draft board in round 1. So my hat's off to Marvin Lewis on that one. Then they come back in round 2 and take Jessie Bates from Wake Forest, a guy that I wonder if he would have been better off going back to school for another year where he could have ended up making himself into a first-round pick. But here late in round 2, he's got athletic upside. He's got some potential as a center fielding type of rangy free safety. He needs time to bulk up a little bit and add some weight, but he can play and eventually could be a starter for the Bengals there. A little bit of risk there, but not a ton of risk. Sam Hubbard in round 3 feels like a very safe pick. Very safe pick. Not a guy with a tremendous amount of upside, but a guy you feel like will outplay that draft position a little bit and, if anything, eventually develop into a base starting left end in the league. And that's kind of what I envision him being. Not bad choice there in round 3. Malik Jefferson, a little more of a risky gamble here in round 3, but he's got athletic upside, and they need athletes in that linebacking core in Cincinnati. So you question about love of football and passion for the game and so forth. You know, at this stage in the draft, that's a more calculated, intelligent gamble. It's worth taking a guy like that and gambling on that athletic upside because, again, they need some athletic upside in that linebacking core. I look at Mark Walton coming out of Miami in round 4. Feels like even coming off the injury he had in 2017, you're not expecting him to be bell cow. That's going to be Joe Mixon. You're not expecting him to be the starter. That's Joe Mixon. You're just asking for a guy that can come in and contribute, spell Joe Mixon, be a change of pace guy, maybe start at times if Mixon is out, and Walton can do that. So a solid, sensible pick there in the early portions of day 3. One of those guys that lacked projectable size in terms of a feature back, lacked the big-time speed, but he can carry the ball. He's got some all-around skill, solid pick. Davontae Harris, Darius Phillips, you're taking a couple of chances at trying to get athletes into that secondary that can help there. Andrew Brown was a highly recruited guy coming out of high school. I don't think ever quite put it together at Virginia. But again, Christ's sakes, you're talking about round 5 here. He's worth the gamble because he's another athlete with good upside. And even I look at round 7. Logan Woodside could potentially be Dalton's backup going forward. Auden Tate from Florida State. He might not make it, but I'm willing to gamble on that size and that leaping ability. I feel like that's a guy that could end up surprising people in round 7. I thought this was an okay draft for the Bengals. I actually did. Like I said, when you take the entirety of the body of work and you factor in peeling down 9 spots, got them a quality starting left tackle in the NFL in Cordy Glenn, that pick that they moved down to got them a long-term starter in the interior of that line, wherever that ends up being in Billy Price. Right then and there, that's pretty good work. You have addressed your biggest need on your team, which was the offensive line, in multiple ways, and you didn't do anything irrational or irresponsible in order to do so. Jessie Bates, Sam Hubbard, Malik Jefferson, all guys that could come in and help that defense. Mark Walton could be a solid role player. I liked what they did. It's not going to be one of those draft classes where everybody's talking about one of the 3 or 5 biggest winners. But I certainly like this draft class this year a lot more than I liked the one last year for the Bengals. That was a lot of risk and a lot of gamble. And as we found out, early returns were pretty mixed to not all that good. I feel like this is a draft where they can see some immediate and long-term impact out of it. I don't know if it moves the needle much for the Bengals when all is said and done, but it most certainly doesn't hurt their cause.